Welcome to the Pipeline Online Podcast. In this episode, we have Mike Harris, former Premier of Ontario. Nuclear power generation is a big deal. Decisions made around it are significant. Premier Harris has been at the heart of those decisions with respect to Ontario. We'll ask him about that and what nuclear means for Saskatchewan. He might also have a thing or two to say about the CANDU reactor and supply chain. Good morning, folks. Welcome to Pipeline Online Podcast, and we have my co-host, Bronwyn Eyre, and Premier Mike Harris, former Premier of Ontario from, I believe it was 95 to 02. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So, Premier Harris, if we can ask you to introduce yourself.
Yeah, pleasure to be with you. You've got me right. I was elected in 81, so I was in government, then in opposition, and then leader of the party, and then Premier 95 from the 95 election, again 99. I stepped down in 2002. So,
and you're a lawyer, correct?
Sorry?
You're a lawyer, correct?
No, but I do have an office at the law firm. So I always said not being a lawyer I thought was an asset. But anyway, I kid my lawyer colleagues at Faskins for that. So no, I was a small businessman from a small town in North Bay, and I ended up moving to Toronto when I became Premier, and I just stayed there. And so since then, I've done a lot of board work and chaired boards, and now I've stepped off a lot of the big boards, and I'm doing a few small sort of startup things, things that I like to do if I like the people, and doing things that I enjoy. And I still do some government relations and advice for clients at the Fasken law firm.
So.
Well, wonderful to have you. And I guess I recall those years well. I recall you coined the phrase, the common sense revolution. Yeah. And I guess going back to that, what do you think the common sense revolution means today, should mean today, and I guess specifically for the nuclear sector, which is really what we're mainly talking about today?
Well, the common sense revolution basically talked about spending within your means, I guess, and that seems to be passé today. Nobody seems to care about deficits or debt, and I think it's terrible. By the way, I think we need another common sense revolution through all the Western democracies. Quite frankly, we're burdening our children, our grandchildren with these massive debts, and I just think it's wrong, and I don't think it's fair. So aside from that, we do want to talk about, I guess, nuclear energy, which was passé for 15 or 20 years, played a major role in Ontario. But if you look around the world, there are a few events. German Chancellor stopped nuclear power. Tragic mistake, because she replaced that by importing nuclear power from France, which was okay, but also oil and gas from Russia, which was a disastrous mistake. And then you had the situation in Japan. And however, nuclear power is back in vogue primarily because of climate change and green energy and greenhouse gas emissions. And so that other than water, which when it's available is certainly, I think the economics are there, and other than solar and wind, which are intermittent, and you need reliable base power. I think that's now been demonstrated. So the whole world is looking again at nuclear power.
Yeah, I've written over 100 stories proving out how wind, while it does work on occasion, it's an occasional thing is the problem. And, there are times like just last week, in one 52-minute period, there was no wind power at all from 1,760 wind turbines in Alberta. That's significant. So I guess, can you provide for us, how significant nuclear power generation is for the Ontario grid, and maybe walk through how Ontario Hydro became OPG?
Well, when I was first elected, the Bruce nuclear power plant, Bruce A and B, were both scheduled to shut down. They were coming up to get ready for refurbishment. The advice that I got from the hydro officials were that they didn't believe they had the expertise that they needed for the existing nuclear that they had, with Bruce. And at that point, we made a decision to sell Bruce Nuclear to British Energy. And if I had a campaign saying I'm going to sell a nuclear plant to foreigners, I would never have got elected. But it was the right move at the time. And it brought a lot of nuclear expertise from Britain into Canada. And it's been a huge success story. So while the province still owns Bruce Nuclear, it's licensed to a private sector consortium to maintain and operate on a sort of 99-year licensing agreement. But nuclear power, hydro was originally, with Niagara, was the original power in Ontario. And then as you run out of the economics of rivers, nuclear seemed to be the way to go. But, we had uranium at the time in Ontario, and of course that all shut down when the much purer and better uranium was discovered in Saskatchewan. So and it's Canadian technology with CANDU, which is different than the high pressure vessels that the rest of the world uses, so that was the first big move that we made. The second you referred to, we split Hydro, which was a huge conglomerate, essentially into two. So the wires business, transmission, became Hydro One, and then OPG became the generation side. And that just seemed to make sense at the time, and also would allow for a sale, if you wanted, of the wires, which did happen in Ontario eventually. And so that's now a private sector. Hydro One is a private sector company, and then the generation, focus on generation.
Premier, obviously big announcement yesterday coming out of India, very significant. Certainly the Prime Minister and Premier of Saskatchewan are saying, significant for Saskatchewan, significant for Canada. I guess just from your perspective, and if you could help people maybe understand the dollars and cents impact of something like that. I mean, where you have an announcement like that, where, now India and Cameco really are going to, work much more closely together. I mean, does that benefit taxpayers? I know royalties on production and so on are always in play, but is it a taxpayer benefit? Is it mainly a benefit to Cameco? How are people best to understand an announcement such as yesterday between Cameco and India?
You've got to help me. I don't know what happened yesterday in that announcement. So,
sorry, I can bring up to speed on that. So, as part of the trade mission of Prime Minister Carney and Premier Scott Moe
with India,
yes, with India, there is an agreement that Cameco will supply $2.6 billion worth of uranium to India over the next 9 years.
Yeah, sorry, I did see that. Does that benefit Canada? Of course. It benefits Saskatchewan. It benefits all of Canada. There is a challenge in I've talked to companies that in dealing with India, you have to be careful. They're very shrewd negotiators, and but put that aside and assume that things are done properly and to the benefit of both countries. Yeah, that's a benefit to Canada and to the taxpayers and for jobs.
I wanted to get into some of the big picture stuff coming from having sat in the big chair at the cabinet table. Saskatchewan's facing some of the largest expenditures in its history by going nuclear. Our coal fleet it's going to be extended for a number of years, but it is otherwise close to end of life. And the reality is, as you mentioned, people are concerned about greenhouse gases. I maybe not be as much, but I like to keep the lights on. And there's 2 sites under consideration, either 6 or 12 miles from Estevan, where I live, where they're looking to build the first small modular reactors. When the initial announcement was made in 22, they talked about 2 to 4. And that's kind of becoming now 2, with the possibility of building 2 large-scale reactors, which would be likely the CANDU or at Westinghouse AP1000. And talking dollars, the Darlington New project east of Toronto is for 4 reactors is going to cost $20.9 billion. And the entire provincial budget in Saskatchewan passed roughly the same time that was announced in April of last year was $21 billion. So the cost of 4 small reactors is basically equal to the entire provincial budget of Saskatchewan. And then you look at, I talked to the president of Westinghouse back in October, and I haven't got any numbers yet really from CANDU, but actually, sorry, Carl Marcotte said we're looking at about $10 to $12 billion for a CANDU, possibly, or for a 1,000 megawatt scale reactor, regardless of brand. How do you, an elected official and someone who has to make the tough decisions, how do you make those decisions to spend that sort of money to create something that could last 60, 80 years? And yet the people now are going to have to pay for it out, and you're going to pay for it politically, which I think you probably did a little bit when you did the Bruce decision.
Well, that's the question that politicians and officials have to evaluate. I obviously, you're not going to pay it all up front, so you're going to have to finance that over a period of time, and there's lots of ways to do that. There are also, the private sector also, with guaranteed takeoff agreements, would probably finance the whole project as well. But those are the first decision that has to be made, and we made the decision in Ontario to shut down coal. Greenhouse gas emissions were part of it, but also particulate and that was there. And so, you've got to make a futuristic decision, and this is one of the problems. The private sector now wants results every quarter. Government wants results every 4 years on the election cycle, and you're talking 60, 80-year life for these plants, whether it's a river that needs to be dammed, which is expensive too, and heats up water and whatnot. You've got to evaluate what makes sense for your jurisdiction. And so this is the process that Saskatchewan is going through right now. And it takes bold politicians to make decisions that go beyond the cycle of elections. And then you've got to figure out how you're going to finance it, whatever way you decide to go.
In terms of you referenced the climate change component, and I hear you on coal in Ontario that there were perhaps other things that factored into shutting down coal as well. Do you see, though, the rise of nuclear, primarily through the lens of the climate change issue? Help again us understand the economics of going nuclear for power aside from the climate side of things.
Well, I think climate change, yes, is a big factor that has brought nuclear power back into vogue. Uh, the I you know, and the appetite for massive amounts of new power that's going to be not only to replace coal, but to fund growth in the economies of jurisdictions. So, but I think climate change has certainly tipped the scales towards nuclear in the long term. Yes.
So you touched on wind earlier and also costs. You know, one of the things that your successors brought in was feed-in tariffs and whatnot for wind and solar. Ontario's, magic power had always been cheap electricity, which is why you had such a strong industrial core, in addition to the skills that you had there. And then when the prices of power came up, I don't think it did you much favors. Can you talk to that at all?
I'm sorry. The price of power in Ontario?
Yes, the price of power in Ontario.
The price of power in Ontario is pretty competitive. And sustainable off into the future. Those are things that have to be evaluated and make decisions. What I'm involved in with Jean Chretien heading out and with many ambassadors, and ambassadors on the Canadians for CANDU are primarily those in the supply chain and the jobs and whatnot that go into building these facilities and maintaining them and operating them, refurbishing them and whatnot, is the CANDU technology versus the alternative. And there are lots of very valid reasons, we believe, why CANDU should be the choice. But the first decision is to make is, are you going to go nuclear or are you not? Then the second choice is, are you going to go with Canadian technology or are you going to go with virtually the rest of the world? Their technologies are all, these high pressure vessels, enriched uranium facilities. And, we just think CANDU has tremendous advantages over them.
So let's get into that in a little bit here. We're just going to go to a 30-second break. Be right back, folks. For your well servicing needs in Southeast Saskatchewan and Southwest Manitoba, you need the General. That's General Well Servicing of Cardiff, Saskatchewan. They've got a fleet of double, triple rigs, pressure vessels, and lighting rentals ready to serve you. They can perform rig assist and frac assist operations as well. Call Kevin at 306-482-3244. That's Call the General at 306-482-3244. Yes, sir. So, Premier, if you could perhaps explain what exactly is Canadians for CANDU, how did that come about and your involvement in it?
Well, it came about with the owners of the CANDU technology. I mean, CANDU technology is owned by the taxpayers of Canada. It's licensed to AtkinsRealis, who own CANDU, the company, and so they set up this group, if you like, called Canadians for CANDU, and it is basically Canadians that if people are planning new nuclear facilities, it's promoting the Canadian technology and the advantages of the Canadian technology. So it's just a group that was put together and by AtkinsRealis. And when I was Premier and Jean Chretien was Prime Minister, we were very pleased, and Chretien was a big promoter of the CANDU technology around the world and selling reactors in Korea and China and other countries around the world. And obviously it meant jobs for Canadians and promoted a technology that we were very proud of. So nothing really was built for a period of 20 years. Ontario had a pretty proud record of refurbishing their reactors and giving them another 60, 70 years of life. But new reactors are just now starting to be in vogue and coming on stream. I mean, the U.S. is talking about 40 or so new nuclear power plants, 1,000 megawatts each, and so is the rest of the world looking at nuclear as part of their mix.
AtkinsRealis used to be SNC-Lavalin, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And Brian, just for the sake of listeners, could you give I have a question on CANDU. Could you just do the quick Coles notes on where we're at in Saskatchewan with the SMR rollout and which companies are in place? And then I know we've also, of course, made announcements about potentially looking at a large reactor, but just to put that in context for people, so I think there's some confusion about that.
Sure. So basically what happened was in 2022, the then Minister Don Morgan announced that Saskatchewan intended on building some of these. It's what's called a small modular reactor. And they chose the technology, which is General Electric Vernova Hitachi. It's a long way of saying it, but it's a 300 megawatt unit, which is almost identical in scale to the Shand Power Station or to Boundary Dam 6 or Poplar River 1 and 2. So that is what we're looking at. This is the design we've chosen. If we build SMRs, this will be the one we build. However, to replace the coal fleet like this, we would need to replace Boundary Dam and all the other coal plants. We would need 5 of these at $5 billion a crack.
Mm-hmm.
So the choice then is, instead of building a whole bunch of these, we may end up building these. This is the AP1000, which is the Westinghouse design. Or we might end up building these. That's the CANDU Monark design. So each of them are 1,000 megawatts scale, roughly speaking. I think the Westinghouse is about 1,100 megawatts, roughly the same size. And the idea is that we would build at least 2. You never build just one. You build at least 2. And so the Minister for SaskPower, Jeremy Harrison, back in January said that we are now embarking on choosing, do we go this way with CANDU, or do we go Westinghouse, or possibly a French design, although the odds on that, I would say, are slim to none.
And just on the financing of that, Mr. Harris, so you touched on that a little bit. I mean, how, of course, when one decides to go down this road, you don't pay everything up front. I mean, financing comes into it and so on, of course. But I just wanted to get your thoughts on this, because this is CANDU related. So Minister Hodgson, the federal energy minister, was over in Poland recently, which you probably are aware of, doing some MOUs with Poland on nuclear. And he was really talking up CANDU, which, as we mentioned, owned by AtkinsRealis. He said it was all about the supply chain, and we can maybe get you to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, there have been concerns. Westinghouse, while it's, Canadian owned, the tech and the intellectual property are American, and there have been some concerns about that. What I wanted to get your thoughts on, and what I was a bit puzzled about when I read about this, was apparently there was $3 billion in export financing that was provided by the federal government, administered by Export Development Canada, so EDC, to Poland. And I just wondered if you had any insight on that, and I certainly don't mean to put you on the spot, but I wondered if you had any insight on why Canada is paying Poland to use CANDU technology in their nuclear.
Well, you'd have to ask the Canadian government, presumably, because Poland probably has a challenge in financing it all on their own. So what the federal government is doing is assisting with the financing. And so is this a good deal? Well, if you're sure that Poland can repay the financing, it's a good deal. But that's an independent decision that's made over the technology. And look, Canada does export financing for all kinds of things that are sold abroad, where they feel that providing the financing helps provide an advantage for their product.
Yeah,
I can actually provide a little bit of a light on that, Bronwyn, because I was typing this last night, actually, from an interview I did back in October, which took me a while to get off the back burner, but I was talking to the president of Westinghouse Canada, and he mentioned specifically that Poland is looking at building at least 3 and possibly 6 Westinghouse AP1000s.
Mm-hmm.
And the financing, which I think was $2 billion, was so that they would use Canadian suppliers as part of that supply chain. So any of that money that's going to be spent has to be spent in Canada, principally in Ontario, to make the widgets and the whatnots to make those reactors for that. And I wanted to get into that, Premier, because supply chain is the big thing. That is where the big bucks are. That's where people will make money and have jobs and build houses and whatnot. I've got a lot of things to think about that, because I mean, if you're going to build this thing 12 miles from my house, and people are, and every nuclear providers, Westinghouse and CANDU and everything else, saying we want to get a supply chain where we're going to build. The reality is, for the steel and the cement, sure, have local. But for all the guts of this thing that's going to make sure it doesn't make me glow in the dark, I want the people who've been doing this for 40, 50 years to be doing it. So all the internals, I want them to come from Ontario, where they've been doing this for all that time. And I mean, what are your thoughts on this, the Canadian supply chain?
Well, you're right. That's where the jobs are in the supply chain. And you mentioned the SMRs. AtkinsRealis is part of the supply chains for the SMRs as well, as is OPG. So they're involved, in that project as well. That's one of the benefits. Once you decide to go nuclear, we would argue, those of us that are strong proponents of the CANDU technology and for the job, why not use the technology? I mean, there are lots of other reasons too, but one of the strong reasons is let's keep the jobs in Canada. And if SaskPower makes a decision to build a large nuclear plant, there will be jobs in Saskatchewan as well. Obviously, there will be jobs in Ontario too.
So
that will benefit from that.
I wanted to do a supplemental on that, because there's a lot of discussion in this CANDU versus what, which is Canadian design, Canadian corporations thus far who have done all the building, versus Westinghouse, which is, American tech, American IP, American construction up to date, other than the ones they're doing in China and whatnot. If we are looking at building a lot of these, and we're looking at up to 18 reactors, 2 in Saskatchewan, up to 4 possibly in northern Alberta, 4 at Bruce, and another 8 at Wesleyville, near Port Hope. That is a huge play, and I'll get more to that in a minute. But I seem to suspect, just like the auto manufacturing, Magna makes seats or bumpers or whatever for Ford and GM and whatever. If I'm going to buy a valve that's nuclear certified from a Canadian supplier, whether that goes into a Westinghouse reactor or goes into a CANDU reactor, I'm probably going to still use the same valve company located in Mississauga. I mean, I'm pretty sure those suppliers can work for either of the technologies. Or am I wrong on that?
No, for sure. Should they choose Westinghouse and using enriched uranium, of which Russia is the biggest supplier, and there are other reasons why we think CANDU makes a lot of sense. But there will be some jobs for sure. But there will be more jobs if it is CANDU technology, clearly, just because the existing supply chain is there and it's not. And so there are right now about 50 ambassadors as part of Canadians for CANDU that are part of the promotion to the governments to choose CANDU, because they know there will be more jobs there than if they choose a foreign competitor.
Brian, did we get a comment from a viewer that I saw flash across the screen?
Brian Crossman threw up here that the NDP in Saskatchewan are opposed to privatization in any form. Project of a scope requires private investment. And, that actually kind of touches on something here, Premier, that, the competition, Westinghouse, being 51% owned by Brookfield, who seems to be everywhere these days. Aussie, 4 years ago, I never even heard of Brookfield. And now I don't have a press release that doesn't have them mentioned. It's like they're taking over Canada. There's a data center announced in Alberta, Brookfield investment here. CO2 wells in Saskatchewan, Brookfield. Can you talk about the private factor of that? You did a little bit, but maybe expand on that.
I'm sorry, is what?
The private factor, you're saying about we need private investment. I mean, are we talking, the big investment things like Brookfield? Are we talking Ontario teachers pension plan? Where does that money come from?
Well, it can come from pension plans, for sure. I think that OMERS is a significant funder of Bruce Nuclear, so it can come from government, it can come from pension funds, it can come from the private sector if that's what they want. The NDP are opposed to lots of things, which is why I think they're stupid. But that's their philosophy, and it seems to be a philosophy that the government should own and run everything. And my general experience is that that's probably the least efficient and successful way of producing goods. But that's their philosophy, and they promote it. And sometimes the public's gullible enough to buy into it, but generally they come back to common sense and say what is the best way to do things. I mean, the private sector builds highways. It isn't government workers that are building highways, I don't think, in Saskatchewan. No. Are they opposed to that?
So I wanted to touch it here. I mentioned the 18 possible reactors that may be built or more large-scale reactors in Canada, and the concept of a fleet buy. Because if Canada does not choose Westinghouse, Westinghouse AP1000s are going to be sold and built around the world, in the United States and Poland and maybe in China and whatnot, and Westinghouse will probably survive. But if Canada in particular does not choose the CANDU, it seems to me like that's an existential crisis. How can we sell it to someone else if we don't buy it ourselves? And if we're going to be doing a fleet, across the country here in 3 different provinces, maybe more in the future, if we don't buy our own product, how can we expect anyone else to?
Well, you're right. The French are not going to buy CANDU, and they're not going to buy Westinghouse. The Americans are everything will be Westinghouse. They're not going to buy the French, and they're not going to buy CANDU. It is a challenge. If if Canada, Ontario, Saskatchewan, Alberta, New Brunswick, if they don't choose CANDU, it becomes a challenge to sell around the world. There's no question about that, which is one of the other reasons why we tend to promote CANDU. But CANDU stands on its own. We haven't even talked about using natural uranium. So Westinghouse requires enriched uranium, which right now is illegal in Canada. That could change, presumably. But where do you get enriched uranium? We don't enrich uranium in Canada. So you would have to send your natural uranium from Saskatchewan out somewhere to get enriched, not to weapons grade, but it gets closer to weapons grade, which is basically the issue in Iran. They need enriched uranium for their reactor, and then if they super enrich it, it gets up to weapons grade. So there is to me, another obvious advantage, particularly for Saskatchewan that produces natural uranium. Do you want to be importing? I guess if you use your uranium, you're going to have to ship it out to get enriched somewhere, unless you want to spend I don't know how many billions setting up enriching facilities in Saskatchewan, which I don't think you want to do. So that's one of the other advantages. The other advantage with CANDU is the isotope production. It's only CANDU technology that allows as well for the production of isotopes, which is a huge new growth industry for medical detection and cancer treatment and other areas. This industry is growing exponentially. So, I mean, that's another reason. So I think CANDU stands on its own as well, in addition to the job, and it has a great safety record around the world, wherever CANDU reactors are operating.
I do think that issue of enrichment is a huge one, and it's completely under the radar, or more or less under the radar. I don't think from a public perception point of view there's enough understanding of that aspect and what would need to, as you've alluded to, be accommodated or changed to accommodate that. I think that's a really important point. The other question from a public perception point of view, and I mean, again, putting on your old political hat to a certain extent, but when we're talking about the Brookfield factor, I mean, an elephant in the room remains that despite the fact that everything's supposedly in a blind trust and so on, that there is that connection to the Prime Minister through the Brookfield, on the Brookfield side of things. Any comment on that, Mr. Harris, just about the sort of political optics of that remains awkward?
It does present a political challenge for Prime Minister Carney, yes. However, I have to tell you, I don't think a successful businessman should be precluded from political office. And so I think people, it's like if you have a minister in Saskatchewan that comes from the say potash industry, and that he has shares in a potash company, he puts it into a blind trust, he does this and everything else, but he knows he has those shares there. Or you have a minister of agriculture that's on a farm and he says, but I put everything into a blind trust and I'm not involved in the day-to-day. That's fine. But you do know that minister of agriculture owns a farm and could benefit from farm policy. So this is the challenge when successful business people go into politics. And I think all you can do is disclose excuse yourself from any decision making that quite frankly, financially could benefit you. So that's the challenge that Mark Carney has. And I don't think, quite frankly, it's fair to use that against him in making a decision on Westinghouse or CANDU. That's my own personal opinion. Politics today, though, is a much nastier game than it was when I was in politics. Not that it was there wasn't some nastiness anyway. But so will some people maybe raise that? Perhaps. I won't be one of those.
No, I understand. And I think, in Saskatchewan, of course, it's bound to come up a bit, only because of, more than a bit, especially given yesterday, with the connection, the Brookfield Westinghouse connection to Cameco, and then Cameco having the deal with India. It's just sort of bound to arise. But anyway, interesting thoughts.
Yeah. Well, I believe Brookfield and Cameco buying Westinghouse, I believe the head of Brookfield at the time was, I think, Mark Carney. So if it wasn't then, it was very close, and he would have had definitely some ties to that, or known about it. We're just going to go to another ad here, folks, and then I want to get back to the enrichment thing, because that's a thread we got to pull. Most people aren't aware of some of the significant parts about that, and how significant that is. Say significant 3 times. Okay, here we go. There's a reason that HG Jack has dominated Saskatchewan's oil patch. That's because that distinctive curved walking beam reduces energy consumption by about 25%. That means 25% less power bills, 25% less carbon tax. That's a big difference. It's available exclusively from Grime Sales and Service, Batman, Saskatchewan. Okay, so I wanted to talk about enrichment here because there are a lot of implications that people really don't understand. Now, what we do with the CANDU reactors, we basically take the, refined but not enriched uranium, run it through some processing at Port Hope, put it into bundles, which I'll pull up here in a second, and shove it into reactors. And that's about it. It doesn't require a lot of refinement. This is what they look like. And the reality is that every other reactor on the planet, except for the CANDU, requires enriched uranium, up to 20%, or what? If the ones that go into nuclear submarines are close to weapons grade, which is like 80%. And to do that, you have to actually be allowed by international law. Now, my understanding is, as a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty, you can't just go and build an enrichment plant because people get upset and they start dropping bombs on your head like they did in Iran. Now, I don't think anyone's going to drop bombs on us if we did it, but we have treaty obligations that basically say we cannot build a enrichment thing. And everyone keeps saying, "Oh, just build enrichment, we'll do it here." No, we're not, unless you know of some magic way that can be changed. As you said, if we want to enrich, we have to get it done in one of the nuclear club, the ones that have like France or United States, or, as you mentioned, Russia. So can you talk to that, sir?
Well, Russia is probably the single biggest supplier of enriched uranium. And so if you're confident that Russia is the kind of partner that you want to have, and that's one thing. I'm presuming that you wouldn't want to get enriched uranium from Russia. But it's another dimension, if you like, that I think favors the CANDU technology, particularly for a province that supplies natural uranium. And
so there is a flip side to that, in that the CANDU reactor is unique in that it uses heavy water as a moderator, as opposed to other reactors use light water. So light water is basically purified distilled water, whereas heavy water is, made with an extra proton there. Yeah. And do we even have the capacity to make additional heavy water in Canada anymore? I thought that capacity was shut down. How are we going to build 18 reactors if we don't build another heavy water plant?
Well, clearly they're going to have to expand heavy water production. I mean, look, Ontario is looking at, as you know, both Bruce Nuclear and OPG are looking at building new nuclear reactors, and so that's one of the things that'll have to go hand in hand. The other advantage of a heavy water reactor is that you can fuel online, so you don't have to shut down the reactor to refuel. This is what allows the isotope production to take place as well. So these are some of the other advantages of the heavy water the reactors that CANDU technology is part of.
So I just like to explain for our listeners who may not be all that knowledgeable about this. This is what a CANDU Caladria, basically the reactor, looks like. And it's a whole bunch of tubes. And in these tubes, that's the end face of it, they have this machine which sticks these fuel bundles into them. I think they're about 7 or 9 deep, give or take. And they plop them in one end and it pushes them out the other end. And as a result, you can, they do several a day for each reactor. They add a few in and they take a few out at the other end. And there's several hundred of these, I think maybe a few thousand per reactor. And it's just an ongoing process. Whereas a reactor that is of any other design, you can't go fuel up on the go. You have to actually stop, turn it off, take the lid off, pull the we call it fuel bundles out, and put new ones in. So you are absolutely down when that happens. Whereas the CANDU can go continuously. It'd be like refueling your car without stopping, or using aerial refueling for fighter planes.
Brian, you're pretty good on this stuff. Good for you.
Well, okay, I will be honest here. Back when I was a young man in youth parliament in my teens, we used to debate several times a year, and young
But you're
people
right.
back then were talking about nuclear all the time. I would take an inch thick file with me to all these events to discuss nuclear so that I could thump them with my knowledge on it.
Yeah.
I also did study a little bit of nuclear engineering when I was flunking on mechanical engineering at U of S, so that kind of helps me out a bit as well.
Yeah. Well, but you're right. I mean, look, the average person really doesn't understand nuclear power to begin with, let alone to differentiate, the two different types of reactors.
One of the things people do, of course, understand, and I guess are concerned about, is the impact on electricity rates, power rates. And just wanted to get your thoughts. This was an article in the Globe from last month on Ontario specifically, and so thought that I would ask you. They talk about in here, and it was Report on Business, what both of you have referenced. I mean, certainly the announcement that the Ontario government will spend $20 billion to build those 4 new small modular reactors in Clarington, and then a further $26.8 billion was announced to overhaul the 4 reactors at Pickering and so on. What they go on to say in here or put out there is that Ontario electricity rates shot up almost 30% in November. They say driven in part by rising nuclear generation costs. Further hikes are almost certain. It goes on and so on. What's your take on that, Mr. Harris, in terms of that, making that link? Build nuclear, build it up. A huge price tag, and will that actually impact electricity rates, or are other things at play here?
Well, whatever if you want power, then you have to. You're building for decades, facility, whether it's a dam and damming up, or whether you're building nuclear plants, or whether you're building wind or so. I mean, look, the wind basically every 20 years that all has to be replaced. So you have to factor that in, and you have to, presumably you want to amortize that over a period of time, so that all that upfront cost isn't affecting the power users today. But that's the evaluation, and governments, if they're building, or private sector, or they have to take all of that into consideration. But it's not a reason not to build. It's a reason to be cognizant of the life of the facility that you're building. And listen, it's the same if you're building a highway. You don't build a highway, and I mean that cost. It's all that comes out of that year's budget, but that highway hopefully lasts more than 1 year. So you have to figure these things out in how you're going to pay for them, and these things aren't cheap.
So if you had 18 holes to knock around of Premier Mo, what to talk about, what he should do with nuclear, what would you tell him during that round of golf?
If I was what?
If you were golfing with the Premier for 18 holes, Premier of Saskatchewan, and he was asking you, Mike, what do you think? What would you tell him? What would be the fundamental, most important issues that you would say that he should be considering?
Well, I basically if the decision has already been made that they're going to go nuclear, I mean, and I want to differentiate the CANDU technology versus the others, I would talk about more jobs in Canada. I would talk about the isotopes. I would talk about the online fueling, the going forward costs, and I would talk about the use of natural uranium versus enriched uranium, and that's these are all factors that are there. Now, having said all that, you still got to consider price. And you know, so we haven't talked about that. Is one technology more expensive than the other? We'll find out. I guess. I mean, right now there's I think there's just been the one Westinghouse 1,000 megawatt reactor that's been built. It was a way over budget, but it was the first one, and so that's presumably they will do better in the future.
So I can provide a little bit of background on that here. So this is the Vogel plant, and Vogel 3 and 4 were the AP1000s that went online in 23 and 24.
Yeah.
So there are another 6, I think, under construction right now, and another several more being planned. And then back in November, the Trump administration said they plan on building another 8 to 10. And the reactor design, while you are correct, it went absolutely over budget by more than a factor of 2. The reality is that that happened during a time when, well, they were already building it, and then the regulator said, "Oh, by the way, you have to make it so that it can take a hit from an airliner." And they were already under construction, so I mean, they had to basically rebuild the damn thing. But what they're saying now is that, look, we've got all the teething things sorted out. We've got the design lockdown. When I talked to the president of Westinghouse Canada, he said any further reactors, no changes will be accepted. It is, you know, we can have any color you want as long as it's black. And Westinghouse already has, like I said, they've built a few. They're building some more. It's a design that has been done, so you're not first of a kind. The Monark design, which is an update from the the version 6, the Monark has not been built anywhere. So,
and that's CANDU.
That's the CANDU. So while it's a variation of an existing design, it is an entirely new design. And you know, so whoever builds it, whether it's Bruce or whether it's OPG or Saskatchewan, will not be the first, I can guarantee that. They are taking the risk of first of a kind, which is generally god awful expensive. So, I mean, that is definitely something that is not in the CANDU favor here. Is that the Monarch, no one's bought one in 20 years.
Yeah.
You know, what can you say to that?
Well, you have to look at the Monarch is basically sort of, we call it Darlington 2.0. I mean, it essentially is the same all the way through, taking it from 750, 800 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. So there is very little new in the Monarch that hasn't already been proven and been built and been refurbished and whatnot that's there. But yeah, that's one of the things you have now is the example of one APR 1000 enough. The third one will be better than the second. The fourth will be better than the third, probably on efficiency, just from right through the whole supply chain. That's a factor. So all of that has to be taken into consideration. I mean, there's when you know, the automobile companies come out with a brand new model and everything else. There's a lot of people say, wait a year or two and see how that new model works before you jump into it. So this is what you have to evaluate as well.
Just given the time, I know we're kind of getting down to the end here. I just wanted to get your thoughts while we have you, Mr. Harris, on the broader Canadian energy landscape. I mean, obviously in Ontario, you have the Ring of Fire that goes on, and there have been some developments. I don't know if you feel they're finally getting there or what your thoughts are on that. And I guess just, you know, nationally speaking about major projects, you know, do you think we'll build another pipeline? What do you think that major projects are going to move forward? Do you think we're still being regulatorily strangleheld? And so on. Just your thoughts on where things are at in Ontario going forward and more broadly across the country.
Well, it's a huge problem, and getting big projects built is a huge problem. And I lay this 100% at the feet of the federal government, and particularly over the last 10 years under one of the most disastrous prime ministers the country's ever had, for deficit, for debt, for immigration, and for the lack of foresight in getting projects built. So that's my thoughts. I think here's, the opposition to pipelines makes no sense to me. It's the safest way of transporting oil or gas. It's certainly safer than rail. It's safer than truck. And to me, it makes a lot of sense. The second argument people use against it is that oil and gas 50 years from now may not be used at all. And if that's the case, wouldn't you want to get your oil and gas out of the ground now? Oil and gas for the next 50 years, and I think it's still going to be used. Anyway, but if you accept the argument that 40 years from now, 50 years from now, we'll be off oil and gas, fossil fuels altogether, I don't accept that. I think anything we can do, if something new comes along that makes sense, that's fine. But if you accept their argument, why would you want to let your stuff stay in the ground while you get Venezuelan oil and you get Iranian oil and you get Russian oil? I mean, none of this makes any sense to me. So I would say we should be building pipelines east, west, north, south through Quebec out to British Columbia. And we should have done so, and they should have started 10 years ago. And there are lots of private sector companies that will build those. What are they afraid of right now? They're afraid of the government will change their mind. So now to get the private sector involved, you're going to have to guarantee them that you'll compensate them if you allow them to start and go through the process, and then you shut it down. It's so silly to me. And that's the way I see it. And I think that's a pretty common sense way of looking at it. And that's what I would encourage the government to be doing.
I guess for my final question here is right on riffing on what Brahman said. How did we become a nation that built 22 reactors in 22 years to a nation that used to build pipelines in 16 months to a nation that I call it Canada? We can't do anything anymore. We can't build. TMX took 4 years, should have taken 16 months. We have much better technology and capacity and GPS. And I mean, when the original was built, they didn't even have hydraulics in most of the equipment. And now we can't seem to get anything done. I think the federal government is absolutely to blame on a lot of it, but I think it's also a lot of attitude. Can you talk to that?
Yeah.
Sorry, you're breaking up there, sir. I think we lost you.
That's too bad.
This is, and it's
I'm hearing you a little bit, but I'm not seeing you. I'm just going to pull you back and bring you back on, okay? Okay, can we hear you now, sir? Well, for our last minute here, I think the tech decided to die on us.
I'm sorry, I'm losing on this sound.
Yeah, I think we got you there now. So I was just asking, how did our attitude change from a nation that did things to a nation that can't do anything anymore? We lost all your previous comments there in the tech.
I think it's frozen, Brian.
I think we're frozen, sir. We're at our time here. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming on here. Perhaps we can speak again in the future, and things are going to get pretty exciting on the nuclear front.
It was lovely to have you, sir. Lovely to chat.
All right. Thank you, folks. Sorry about the tech problems there at the end. That's computers. That's life. Have a good day.